So we know that the heart pumps and pushes blood into arteries. But arteries resist receiving this blood. So the heart has to work to overcome this resistance. The more the arteries resist, the harder your heart has to work. There are three factors that determine how hard your heart has to work to pump the blood into your arteries. So these three factors determine the resistance of your arteries. The first factor is artery diameter. Okay, here we have a constricted artery. And here we have a dilated artery. The constricted artery has more resistance. Right? Think of like a hose or a straw. If something is narrow, it's harder to push fluid through that. The dilated artery has less resistance. So if your arteries are wide, it's a lot easier for the heart to pump that blood through those nice wide arteries. Okay, then let's look at what causes arteries to constrict or dilate. This is controlled by your autonomic nervous system. So you remember this from chapter 15. This is where we have sympathetic and parasympathetic. Now remember that sympathetic is the only one that controls arteries. Parasympathetic has no effect on the diameter of your arteries. Okay, when you have increased sympathetic, that is going to give you overall constriction. Now, sympathetic stimulation will dilate the blood vessels in your skeletal muscles, but it causes constriction of all other blood vessels. The net result is that you have more constriction than dilation. So when you increase your sympathetic stimulation, you get a net effect of constricted blood vessels, and your heart has to work harder to pump the blood. This also increases your blood pressure. Now remember, there's no parasympathetic. So in order to dilate blood vessels, all you do is turn down your sympathetic. If you have less sympathetic stimulation, then the blood vessels will dilate. When they dilate, this decreases your blood pressure and your heart doesn't have to work quite so hard. Our next factor is vessel length. Okay, blood vessels have friction in them. So as blood flows through the blood vessel, you get friction. The longer the vessel is, the more friction you have. So the top one here, the shorter vessel, would have less friction. So this would be less resistance. The bottom one, the longer vessel, would have more friction. So this would be more resistance. So one of the big factors that determines your blood pressure is the total length of blood vessels in your body. We're not talking about one individual vessel. We want to know the total vessel length in your body. Okay, the more total vessel length you have, that means you have more resistance, which means that your heart has to work harder and you have higher blood pressure. This is why there's a relationship between weight and blood pressure. Obesity and blood pressure often go together. If you are obese, you have a lot of adipose tissue. All that adipose tissue has blood vessels to it. Having lots of adipose tissue means you have a lot more total blood vessel length. And the more total blood vessel length you have, the higher your resistance and higher your blood pressure. This is why losing weight can often reduce blood pressure. Because if you lose weight, then you lose that adipose and you lose those blood vessels that were in the adipose. So by losing those vessels, you reduce your vessel length. And reducing vessel length will reduce your resistance. Our third factor is your blood viscosity. Okay, remember from chapter 18 that there's a direct relationship between viscosity and hematocrit. Remember in lab when you made the 40% and 60% hematocrit and raced them down the paper? So the higher your hematocrit, means you have a higher viscosity. And you also learned in chapter 18 with the dangers of blood doping, that makes your blood too thick and it's hard for your heart to pump. So higher viscosity means that you have more resistance. So the thicker your blood is, the more resistance you have, the harder it is for your heart to pump and your blood pressure goes up. So these are the factors that determine how much your heart has to work to pump blood through your arteries, which then in turn affects your blood pressure. The more resistance you have, the higher your blood pressure is.